Welcome to our first video tutorial. This tutorial is going to be centered around camera setup. It's going to be split into 5 sections. The first section is going to be what is a PoE switch. Next, we will go into how to connect your camera to that PoE switch. The third section will be to how to find the IP address of the camera once it is set up. The fourth section will be a quick overview of the SNST OS. The final section will be how to put the camera to developer mode to prepare you for the future video tutorials.
In the first section, I would like to go over the PoE switch. PoE stands for Power over Ethernet. This allows the camera to gain its power from the Ethernet, so you don't need a separate power supply. There's several cameras that you can also use a separate power supply, but many cameras require PoE. First example here is a 5-port switch. You can see there's 5 different Ethernet ports. What's important to note is that on a lot of PoE switches, not all of the ports are powered. So for this one, you can see on the left 4 is a different section. These are the powered, and then there's one not powered. Generally, you'd use the not powered one to get the internet to the switch, and then you could put up to 4 devices on the switch. On the bottom here, you can see there's 8 ports. Here, there's 4 powered ports that are clearly marked PoE ports, and then there's 4 non-powered ones. So this you could use in an office and then have several devices that don't need power and several that do. Do note that you can always hook up something that doesn't need power to a powered port and it won't do any damage. It just won't necessarily utilize the power function. Other than that, you would also in the back is just a simple power plug. Each of the switches can come up with their own power, which depending on which country you are, which plug will be in. Next, I would like to go over hooking up your Ethernet cable to the camera itself. On a box-type camera, you can see here the port is generally directly in the back and it's pretty simple. You would just need to hook up the Ethernet cable from here to the PoE switch. The dome-type cameras are a little more advanced but not very hard. You'll see here on the outside there's generally 3 screws that keep the outer dome on. These screws generally use a security-type screwdriver that can be found in the box with the camera. So I already have these 3 loosened. Once you loosen them, you just got to carefully remove the dome and set it to the side. And then there's 2 things that you're going to care about here. The first one is the Ethernet port here, which you'll actually plug in the cable to. And then second, there's generally a port that you can take out. Here I already took it out. You can see just it's a basic screw. You take this out, and this allows you to run the cable to the outside of the camera. That way, once you replace the dome back over, the cable will be going through and you can still secure the dome.
Here you can see on the VivoTech camera, the Ethernet cable hooked up to the Ethernet port on one side, ran through the guide hole, and this will allow you to reattach the dome and assemble the camera completely and install it. Next here's the 5-port switch, where you can see the 4 powered ports on the left with the cable running from the camera to one of the power ports, and the cable running from your internet or router to one of the other ports. This cable could be put into any of the ports and it would still work because it doesn't need the power, but those ports can do both. In the next section, we're going to be using the device management tool. You can download the device management tool for any operating system at the below link. Once you have your camera hooked up to the PoE switch, and you also have hooked up the internet to another port on that switch, you'll want to give the camera 3 to 4 minutes to boot up to make sure everything's running and processing. After that's done, you'll want to run our device management tool that you can download from our site. Here's the opening screen for that once you install it. You'll want to come over and just hit the Discover Cameras. This will take a few times. The first time it's done, I've already done this on this network. And what this is going to do is go through the network, show all the different cameras that are listed on that network. You can find the camera generally based on the MAC address that's all labeled onto the camera, on which if you do have multiple on that network. And here you can see the IP address listed by that. So once you have that, you can go on to the next step. If this doesn't work or you want to use another tool for some reason, you can use general IP scanners. Will do the same thing. Or if you have access to your router, you can also log into your router and find the IP address that way. Once you have the IP address to your camera, you will want to come to a computer, laptop that is also on the same network as that camera. Once you're on there, you will open up a browser. I'm in Google Chrome currently, but any Google Chrome, Firefox, Explorer should all work. At the top, you can come in. You do want to go to https:// the IP address that you listed. After the IP address, you'll want to put a :8443. The 8443 is not always required, but it will always work, so we do recommend it. And then you'll browse to the site and you'll see something like this. If you don't see this pop up, you may have to accept a certificate to allow access to the site. Once you allow access, you'll see this pop up. If you've never have received the password or anything in a sticky note in the box of the camera and no one's ever logged in before, the username will be admin and the password will be admin. Generally, though, on a lot of the cameras we send out, if you did get a camera from us directly, then we'll send in a little sticky note with the password on there for you. Once you put in the username and password, hit log in. So the first menu, the preview menu, will allow you to see the pipeline status and give you a brief little picture of what's on the camera now. On the left-hand side here, you can see a list of all the different menus. If this list is not up, if you hit the 3 lines here, you can minimize or maximize this menu to bring it up. The second menu here is going to be the camera info screen. This is some of the basic camera info, the device ID, the OS version, etc. It's where you would also set there if you needed to ever reboot the device or factory reset. This will also be where we come in for developer mode, but we'll come back to that in the next portion. Next is the privacy mask section. And this would be if you wanted to enable it to kind of block out, blur out a certain section, if you had something more vital information or something you needed blocked out that you didn't want other people that had access to this camera to see, or if you were recording this camera, some section you didn't want recorded. The virtual camera section is more so that you can either create other views or have applications that create alternate views with maybe different angles, rotated angles, or something of that sort. Next is video settings. Here you can come through, you can rotate the actual camera, set some exposure settings, white balance, etc. A lot of this is set by default, but if you ever need to change anything. The stream configuration also has some other setups like frame rate and bit rate, etc. that you can come in and modify here. The camera health section is going to be where you can come in and see a lot of the hardware information. It's also where you can come in and either see the information from system maps or be able to download the log files directly on the camera. The user management section will allow you to come in, create users, and actually give different access rights for different users. So if you do have multiple people that maybe only want to see some of these screens, you can have them and give them those permissions. Wi-Fi Connect will allow you to come in and set up wireless network on the camera. If you don't want to have it wired and you have a separate power supply for the camera, you can use this. Next is the actual network setup. By default, it's generally on DHCP, so this allows just the general router to give the IP address, but you can always come in here to configure a manual IP address in either IPv4 or IPv6. If you do use a static IP address, obviously, if you move that camera, you'll need to come in and switch it beforehand or set up the new network to use that IP address also. The date and time section is pretty standard. You can come in here and actually set the different times of the camera on the date, year, etc. The firmware will come in and show the actual firmware that's on the system right now, but this also gives us a nice easy place where we can come in, upload, and automatically install the new versions of the firmware. The certificate management, so you can come in and install different web certificates, etc. if you ever need to change that or add additional ones. Under applications, the overview screen will list all the different applications that are installed on this camera. So right now there's only one by default with the OS, but if you loaded other applications on there, you would have a list of this, and this is where you can come in, see the status of those, if they're running, if they're not running. You can also stop and start those applications and that kind of information. In the IoT gateway, you can come in and add a new connection if you want to send anything to any other devices or anything else on the network, either through MQTT or REST currently, and we may add things, other protocols in the future. Messaging access control allows you to come through and actually set the right of applications and what they're allowed to send or receive and etc. on the system. Cloud Connections comes through and allows you to actually come in and set up the cloud connections so that you can access the web store, the application store, and install stuff directly from there. For the next section, we're going to be going over developer mode and how to put your camera into developer mode. While you're in default mode, you're able to access the application store and install applications and trials from the store. You won't be able to do this once you enter developer mode. However, you will be able to access the camera through ADB and install applications through ADB that do not have a license while you're testing and building them. It is important to note that you can always put your camera back to the default mode by resetting it to factory defaults in the camera information screen. To set your camera to developer mode, we're going to go to the camera UI. You're going to want to go to the device information screen or device info. You're going to want to come down to the firmware, and you're going to want to click 7 times. After 5 and 6 times, it's going to pop up a little warning letting you know 2 clicks, 1 click away from developer mode. So we're going to go through here. On the 5th click, you can see it start popping up, and then it says 1 more click. And then once you actually click the 7th time, the little developer mode section will pop up. Once you click here, there's going to be some information about developer mode, and you can scroll to the bottom, and then you're going to need to put a username and password here. You can use whatever username or password you logged into this account as long as there's access to the device info screen. So here, I was logged in as the admin, and then I'm going to hit proceed. Your camera is now in developer mode. We're going to show you more steps of what to do with this and how to utilize ADB in the next tutorial.